But we've talked about it on the last time that you were here, the case for why we need a new economic bill of rights. So that we can get to it for the audience, would you outline, enumerate what would be in an economic bill of rights? And I think maybe that would help people to understand why it's so important.
Go ahead, Harvey.
Oh, I was pointing you. Well, an economic bill of rights is an idea that's been a part of the progressive tradition for some time. But unfortunately, the Democratic Party for some time has basically turned its back on it. It goes back to Franklin Roosevelt, who in 1944, in the State of the Union message, laid out, well, in the 1944 State of the Union, responded to American aspirations for guaranteed universal health care, guaranteed education for young people as far as they were able to pursue it, and guaranteed jobs with living wages, and a host of other things, which we've also tried to include and enhanced. Well, it's also the case that even though this was laid out and Americans wanted it, as polling showed, 85% wanted guaranteed universal health care. In the course of the Cold War and beyond, the Democrats seemed to lose touch with it. Surprisingly, in 1960, and I really want to highlight this, it's not in our article. In 1960, the Democratic Party platform actually called for pursuing the Economic Bill of Rights and laid out the platform entirely in terms of that. Then A. Philip Randolph, responding in good part to the opportunities provided by Lyndon Johnson in the Great Society moment, proposed a freedom budget, which was a 10-year plan to abolish poverty, renew rural life, transform urban life, and address questions of structural racism. Martin Luther King Jr., only weeks, months at the most before his assassination, also called for an economic bill of rights. So this has been part of the tradition, part of the, if you like, the legacy. However, for too many years, Democrats turned their backs on these kinds of aspirations.
That's the part. Yes.
And here we are. I'm sorry. Yes. And here we are.
No, I wanted to go ahead, finish that thought, because when you say the Democrats, that's where I was getting ready to ask Brother Allen. And just for the sake of time, Brother Allen, the stuff that Professor Harvey Kaye just outlined seems to be absolutely reasonable. Healthcare for everyone, jobs for everyone. I mean, these things are not rocket science. These are things that are not only good, but also help the economy. So if these are things that are winning propositions, I think Professor Kaye was getting ready to nail this question. But why is it so difficult to get even our people, Democrats, to support it?
Well, there was a shift in the sort of economic organization of American society with Ronald Reagan. And for the most part, the Clinton administration coming in as the sort of, as the basis for how the Democratic Party was going to approach the economy starting in the 1990s, basically acquiesced to the strategies that were developed during the Reagan years. And so what happened was there was less progressive social spending after that. And as Harvey pointed out, the two periods in which an economic bill of rights were pushed was at the end of the Roosevelt administration for a few years after that. We did have what could be seen as a more inclusive, though not inclusive adequately at all because of structural racism, social democratic economic social contract in the 40s and 50s. And it was, of course, attempted to be expanded in the 1960s by the Democratic Party. Economic turbulence in the 1970s and basically an economic reaction starting with Reagan that the Democratic Party more or less absorbed, except on the margins of the party in the 90s, in the noughts. And then the market crash occurred in 2008. And I think there was enough dissatisfaction with the results of the American economy across the general population. You saw the Occupy demonstrations in 2011. You have the Sanders campaign in 2016. And I think with the Sanders campaign, the emergence of the squad, again, following about now, what are we on, about 14 years? Where, the prospects for upward mobility in the society have really stalled. And they were on life support. If you actually look at the statistics in the 90s and the noughts, American social mobility had really declined, but it's pretty much flatlined since the market crash of 07, 08. Yeah.
To say the least. Professor Kaye, I want to come back to you, and Pastor Galloway and Sister Ford, I would love for you to get in on the conversation. I just want to proposition or give you this. I heard Alan talking about the Clinton administration. One of the things that I have a chance to talk to my mother about on this side of the Clinton administration was how the Clinton administration used Black mothers, my Black mother, to end the safety net as we knew it with the welfare to work program. And I had a chance to spend some time with her, and turns out that back in the 90s, they were hiring a bunch of Black women to go into the Black communities and get the Black women off. And I'm using this because there was racist jargon, there was racist undertones, to get them off of welfare and back to work. And the biggest irony, Professor Kaye, I know you would understand this, was that when we think back about it, she wasn't working for the government. She was working for Lockheed Martin. The checks came from Lockheed Martin back in the 90s, a part of the Clinton administration's plan to get Black people off the safety net. Could you just kind of dovetail? I know that's a big one, but could you dovetail how insidious that is to connect the defense contracting industry with the removal of the safety net from the Black community using Black mothers by Bill Clinton, no less?
Well, the first thought that comes to mind is of all people, President Dwight Eisenhower's warning in his farewell address to be wary of the military-industrial complex. It's also notable, I believe it was Clinton who told his cabinet, maybe told all Americans, that I can't recall, that we're all Eisenhower Republicans now. But in fact, if we were all Eisenhower Republicans now in the 90s, we would not have seen Lockheed Martin going out and trying to literally replace a decent, or developing welfare system in America. I mean, sorry, that story just literally threw me back. That's how I didn't know that. That is amazing.
I didn't know it either until I didn't really put the pieces of the puzzle together until I started doing this work, Georgia. That finally I thought about it, and I remember my mother working with the Clinton administration. But then I was like, I never remember working with the Clinton administration, but I do remember her working for Lockheed Martin. And it took about, I don't know, what's that, 20, 30 years before I realized that the government used Black people to go and destroy the safety nets here that we need, that all people need. And then that money was going to defense contractors. But it just really speaks to how stories can go hidden for decades, and they're right on our noses.
If I could just mention, sorry, Georgia, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. I mean, I was just going to say, I think it's fascinating, Ben, that it comes to light eventually, but then also the juxtaposition of those efforts against certain administrations really using derogatory language to talk about Black women on welfare. I recall a very famous speech where, there was this depiction of the welfare queen. Right. And so I think, the question here when we talk about any type of economic bill, we have depended on different administrations and politicians to pass this. And it seems like, at almost every turn they failed. So what it makes me think about is like, how can we, as the people, do what we need to do to create a better economy, without their approval? Because if we're waiting on them, I mean, we're going to be waiting another 60 years.